Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the inaugural Internet of Things World Asia. So when they first approached me to be conference chair for this event, I was very interested in getting involved because I do a lot of these things, so it's kind of fun for me. But I said I wanted to try something different. And because the last event, or one of the big events I had done recently, there were 93 presenters and panelists over 2 days, and 90 of them were men. So basically what we weren't getting was that female representation in these types of events. So what I did is I reached out to the people that Lean In. So you have Uma and Helen here in the front, who are the people who co-founded Lean In Circle in Singapore. And what we've tried to do is work with them to actually drive more female presenters, panelists, and attendees. Now I'll admit we did come up with an ambitious target of hopefully getting 30% over the course of the event. We probably won't reach that, but we've made some good progress in the meantime. So what I would say is they're also running some sessions here at the event during the day. Go up, introduce yourselves to them. You don't have to be a woman. I'm actually quite involved in the things they do as well. But in advance, thank you very much for all of your help with the event. So thank you, Lean In. Yep. And now let's get on to the keynote. So we're going to talk about the Internet of Things and the calm before the storm. Now, when I first did my presentation, if you've seen the outline, I'm not supposed to be talking about this. It was supposed to be about tech meets applications or something. But when I started looking at the data and the market and what I see right now going on, I do really think we're in the calm before the storm. Things are moving forward, but it's relatively peaceful. What I think is happening is there are going to be some major announcements coming up in the coming months that are going to create this storm. But don't worry, I'm not talking about a storm like the hurricanes or flooding as we've seen in the US. What I'm talking about is something that's going to be a little bit more exciting. So it should be some really good days for us in the coming months ahead. But before I go into that, I want to ask you two questions about the Internet of Things. Number one, do you think we're making enough progress? And this is in our smart cities, in our enterprises, in our consumers. If you go back a few years, people were talking about how all these things are going to transform the way we work, live, and play. Do you really think we're making the most of it so far? And I think most of you agree with me that we're not quite there yet. So then the next question from that is, well, why not? And are we learning from our mistakes? And the example I'll give about this relates to enterprise mobility, which I've done since before the BlackBerry. And to be honest, we've never come close to realizing its potential because we failed to understand the complexity of mobility and the ecosystem that was involved. So these are the two questions that I'm going to look at during this presentation in my analysis. And what I'm going to talk to you about is the state of IoT. And this isn't really just about in Asia. I'm going to look at it more globally, and I'll give you some examples of what's going on globally as well. But what we've also going to do is release some survey information. So we've just come back with preliminary data from a global IoT survey with my partner company Ecosystem. And this is the prelim data with 582 respondents. It's going to be over 1,000 when it's finally released. So this is the early data, but what we're going to be able to do is show you who's doing what challenges they face, and who's driving the market going forward. What I like about this is we've split it. It's almost 50-50 between IT and the lines of business. And what I also like a lot is 46% of the companies have already deployed solutions, and 54% are in the process. Now, this allows us to look back at what the challenges they faced when they deployed initially, and also what people are going through today. And finally on this, we focused on the decision makers. So over 70% of them are the IoT decision makers, with the rest being influencers. Enough on that, let's get to the data. So IoT goes mainstream. And this was the one question I've been dying to ask. I wanted to understand, are we still in the world of buzzwords? Are we stuck on buzzwords, or do people actually know what these things mean? So we asked the respondents, do you understand what these different terms mean? And if you look at the red on the right, that's where they understand the capabilities and limitations of these different trends. And in the pink one is more the basic understanding. And what you can see here is the gray ones are the worrying ones. That's where we've heard of it, but we don't know what it is, and we're not familiar. But if you look at a lot of these terms that were buzzwords a couple years ago, talking about predictive analytics, AI, machine learning, you know, over 3/4 of the people, close to 80%, now understand what these things actually mean. And you go down to augmented reality and virtual reality. People know the capabilities and limitations now. And what's shocking, even blockchain, you're looking at almost 70% of the people say that they understand blockchain, or at least the basic understanding. Now, I question that because blockchain is actually quite complex, but it's a good start. And what I think out of this, we're only left with a couple of buzzwords still. Deep learning, people still don't understand what that means. So vendors, if you're looking at deep learning, work on the messaging. And then about digital twins. It is still early days for both of these. But basically, the rest of these things have gone mainstream, which means the customers and the vendors are starting to understand not only the capabilities, but also the limitations. The other good news for any vendors in the audience, budgets are increasing. And we looked at it in two ways. What happened to your budgets in 2016 to 2017, and then what is happening next year going into 2018. And you can see last year, 56% had an increase, 43% stayed the same. Now it's going to be rising to 60%. So there's money going into this, which is very positive because you want to see the industry drive forward. But, of course, there's still challenges ahead. We need to address these challenges. And I've split them out into three different areas. There's challenges we face in the ecosystem. So this is working with the larger vendor community. And there's challenges we face around security, which are always going to exist. And then there's internal challenges we face. And if you look at the top part in the red, when you look at that ecosystem, vendor integration, 48%, is still the biggest challenge we face. To get the multiple products from multiple vendors to work in a single solution. So that's the biggest one, and that is a big risk to our projects. When you look at security, I guarantee you one thing, any presentation over the next 10 years around IoT, security is still going to be the top one. It has been for years. I expect that to continue. Internally, we are making progress, but we still have a big skill shortage. And I don't think it's the technical skills that's much. It's outside of just the technology side, it's into the operations side. It's people who know how to look at a business process and identify a solution that can actually help improve it. We still have challenges around understanding CapEx and OpEx, but the best part of this survey, the one that I'm most happy with, is lack of senior management support is down at 18%. Now, if you go back the last couple of years, this came out as one of the biggest challenges we face. Management was not supporting IoT. What's happened is management now understands disruption. They know that technology is important to drive their business strategy going forward. And when you look at this further, you start realizing IoT, it isn't just about the technology teams. You need management to support it. You need strategy to get involved because they'll help define the roles going forward. Operations need to get involved because it's going to impact your business processes and your employees. Finance because somebody's got to fund it. Marketing because it could change your customer experience. And the users. We need to get the end users involved. So we asked them which organizations, which part of your organization is actually involved in IoT. And what you see, of course, IT is on top, but senior management comes in as the number 2 stakeholder that's involved in these initiatives. And this is important because it's that top-down approach that will push this through these organizations. Go down, operations, finance, strategy, the risk, and the big worry I have on this slide is we're not involving end users. There was a stat from Cisco recently that came out. They talked about how 3/4 of IoT projects fail. Well, this is why, because we're not getting the end users involved. We're failing when we actually deploy them because we haven't worried about whether they would be adopted by the people who are supposed to use them. Next, we'll look at the ecosystem, and everyone here knows how IoT works. We have these things that collect data, it's sent over a network, through the platform, to the apps, and then all that data gets stored. Across the top of all of this, you've got the security issues, you've got the integration, and then the managed support. But this means you've got dozens of vendors who could come together to deliver a single solution. And this is a challenge for any organization. Who do you pick? Which partner should you be working with? So vendors, though, have stepped up their game because if you go back a few years, they were really selling kit. They sold their technology like a product. Buy this because it's IoT, even though it didn't have the full ecosystem. And what we found is these vendors have now moved into more that solution selling mode. And this was another question I was keen to ask about. We know that people can talk about technology. So if you look at the red, that's where they can discuss the technology benefits in detail. And 42% is where they can do it, but you still need a little bit more help. The red and the pink are where their vendors can actually explain this. And what's important, it's not just about the technological impact of IoT. It moves into what effects does it have on your operations? What are the financial use cases behind it? Where are you going to drive your ROI? And how is it going to impact your strategy? Now, this shows that the market's becoming more mature. A couple of years ago, the vendors weren't talking about operations, finance, and strategy. They were just trying to sell their kit. So this shows it's becoming more mature, and we're realizing what we need to do to drive the market forward. But the other complexity, there's no clear leader in IoT. And if I asked you, what vendor comes top of mind when you think about the Internet of Things, and we did this to our respondents, the leader is actually IBM, but that's only at 8.1%. So it's not completely dominant. And if you go through the rest of the top 6, it's some of the biggest names in IT and ICT industry, And you've got Microsoft, Cisco, SAP, Huawei, and Amazon. The number 7 one is 3G Cell Labs. Now, here's a question for you. How many people know who 3G Cell Labs are? Good, I don't feel so bad, because when I saw the survey results, I had to Google them. It's an Indian company that actually makes some amazing solutions for IoT in the sensor space. And in India, they're very well known, but I hadn't even heard of them. And this is the challenge we face. There was 582 responses. We got 96 different company names as the one that comes top of mind. So there's no clear leader, but the good thing is everybody seems to be doing it and everyone's talking about it. That will drive the market forward. So if you're looking at this, which partner should you choose? This is where it gets to be very complex because there's so many different options. If you remember that ecosystem, you've got your analytics vendors, hardware vendors, and I wanted to figure out who's using which partners. And I looked at 2 different types of projects. First, I looked at existing IoT projects. So vendors, they made their vendor selection maybe a year ago or 2 years ago. So we can understand who they used then. And then I looked at the future IoT projects. Those are the ones that are coming up. So I wanted to find out if there's a change. Has the market moved where maybe 12, 24 months ago, I was looking at one type and I moved on to the next one. And I know this is a very detailed slide, so I'll try to walk you through it here. The analytics vendors, so this could be your AWS, Microsoft Azure, they've gone from 20% down to 17%, but they're still definitely one of the leaders in this. The next one, the hardware vendors, your Cisco-type companies, they're increasing from 15 to 23% of the projects. And that's good. That means it shows that they're going in there and finding out their role and bringing together their partner ecosystem to actually drive this going forward. Fixed mobile operators as well. These are having a big increase. Now, why would the mobile operators suddenly have a big increase? Well, it's all going to relate to things like NB-IoT, and we'll cover more on that later. Devices and modules, they're going down. And the challenge around that is because, let's face it, they get involved early in the game, they wait for everyone to catch up, and they move on to the next thing. So I would normally expect that to happen. Network equipment manufacturers are also going up, and that's because of things like NB-IoT, where companies like Nokia, Ericsson, and Huawei are actually bringing together the ecosystems to the operators to try and drive these solutions. The next 2 here worry me a bit, systems integrators and operational technology vendors. And they're both going down a little bit. To be honest, if you asked me which would be my choice for picking this, I'd look a lot at the SIs, because you need someone to integrate all of this. And also, the operational technology vendors, they're the ones who tend to own the line of business already. So they own the customer decision makers a lot. So I'm kind of curious about why they haven't done as well. And then you've also got the cloud providers and platform providers still growing into a little chunk. Now, when you look at this slide, what's important to realize is there's really no right answer. People pick the vendor to be their lead partner based on their own individual requirements. But it's important to be thorough and make sure when you pick one of these, you understand their ecosystem and who they can bring to the table for you. So the state of the industry, to summarize, IoT finally has moved beyond the buzzwords, which is good. Companies are starting to take IoT seriously. They're sticking resources and cash behind it. The ecosystem fragmentation, though, is still going to slow growth, so there's a lot of room to go forward on that. And the technology exists, but we need the solutions. So what's next? And this is the next question. What are we actually going to do now? Well, enter the low-power WANs. And I'm going to go through this one briefly. I'm sure there'll be other presentations on this later on if you want more detail on it. Basically, a low-power WAN is a dedicated IoT network. They're very low cost to deploy, which means they can pass that savings on to you, the customers. And there's a big demand for this, whether you look at smart cities, whether you look at manufacturing-type firms. So we need these networks to support IoT going forward. The quick one is there's 3 different types of it that are really driving the market. There's narrowband IoT, which is backed by the mobile operators. And then you have 2 unlicensed spectrum, which are LoRa and Sigfox. And they're backed by a different group of people. So LoRa is backed by fixed and mobile operators. Smart cities love LoRa, and enterprises as well, because they're very good at site locations. Now, Sigfox is also different as well, because they try to do more country networks. But they create their own network operators, who tend to be more like systems integrators. On the coverage-wise, NB-IoT is good for a city or a country. Sites or cities for countries for LoRa. And then Sigfox can link together a global network for you right now up to 38 different countries. So that becomes interesting if you've got a global offering. The real crux of this is who's backing it. Sigfox has the most evolved ecosystem because it's the most mature. And what's interesting is you've got people, even like the operational technology vendors, backing them today. So they're really working forward on this. If you look at LoRa and NB-IoT, it's growing still, but it's going to take a while. This is going to get interesting because coming up, we've got some big change. Low power WANs. If you go back to July 2016, so just over a year ago, we had a LoRa offering up in Korea. We had one. And then Sigfox started rolling out their operators across the region. And there was some more LoRa announcements. And now what you're going to see in the second half of this year is an explosion of narrowband IoT networks. So what we have is all these new low power WAN networks across the region. And this is where it gets exciting because now we've got this platform on which we can build. And it's a low-cost platform, so people who are the consumers or the citizens can actually start developing on it. So it should be a lot more exciting that way. So what challenges do people face with it? Really, I'm going to focus on the top two. When you look at low power WANs, they're very concerned about the security. But I just think because they haven't thought through what endpoints they're going to be connecting and how they should be supporting it. The risk is, though, for me, is the lack of use cases. Everybody who's launching a low power WAN talks about, we can support smart meters, we can do tracking. Okay, what else can you do? We don't need a dozen, we don't need 100. We need thousands of use cases, and I don't see that variety coming out yet. We need a lot more work on this to come up with these unique use cases that will drive the market. And it's not going to be a few more. It's going to be thousands that are going to go after that SMB sector that are tailored for them. And everyone's getting involved in it. So this will be a little bit difficult to read, but all these different vendors, which are some of the biggest operators, network manufacturers, equipment manufacturers, software developers, all of them are getting involved in low power WANs. So everyone's doing it. The question is, where are these cool solutions that are going to be so transformative? So what I've done is I've created something called a watch list. And I'm going to run you through 3 of these quickly, of 3 solutions I found in the market that fascinate me. And they're very diverse, so it's not like I'm picking on one or favoring one or the other. But the first one on this, elderly care in Asia. Now you're thinking, what does elderly care have to do with people in Asia or with IoT? Well, we have a crisis that's looming. Today, there's 547 million people in Asia who are over 60 years of age, and that's going to rise to 1.3 billion by the time we hit 2050. There's going to be 260 million people in 2050 that are over 80 years of age that we're going to have to take care of. And when you look at the spend, they're looking at $22 trillion in spend to support the elderly just by 2030. So how do we make this process better by leveraging IoT? And for everybody who wants to know why I'm so interested in this, in 2050, I will be 80 years old if I live that long. So this is self-preservation. I want my life to be easy when I'm 80, so let's work on this together to help me in the future. But it's an exciting thing. So what I've been tracking is this company out of Shenzhen called Omate. And they make some incredible different types of wearables, but they built one in particular that's just for the elderly. And basically it has a SIM card built in, it can call an ambulance, it can press an emergency. It can give you the notifications where it's time for you to take your medications. You can chat with people, so if you've got a son or a daughter, you can chat directly from the device on their wrist with them. But that's just a piece of technology. They needed an ecosystem. So they partnered with a company in Europe called SafeMotion, and they have a platform. And that platform allows them to go to a mobile device or a screen. So when they launched this in the US, when my mom has an emergency, if it presses a button, I will be getting notified in Singapore. This is where it gets cool. But now we've created a solution because we've combined multiple technology. Then they bring in the other side of the equation. So if you look at Credit Arkea, in France, this is a very large insurance company that is also a bank. Why this is important? They have 5 million customers in France. That means they own the users of this product. So what they're doing is bringing them all together, and they've created this great ecosystem now that will drive it forward. And this is exciting because it helps bring a one-stop shop, a one-stop solution to the market. So they've launched this in France. Keep an eye on Asia and the US in about the January timeframe. So this is a very cool one. But what I like about it and why I think this is a game changer, number one, it's best practice for collaboration. They didn't just focus on the supply side or the technology vendors. They brought in a partner on the demand side to create the full ecosystem. Next, and this is my favorite part of it, the big hindrance on these types of solutions is who wants to pay for the watch? Governments don't want to pay the money. Insurance companies don't want to cough it up. They're launching it as wearables as a service, elderly care as a service, which means you don't have to absorb that cost, which means it gets over those initial hurdles of this expensive CapEx model and moves it to a more OpEx model. And finally, if this model works for elderly care, you can start applying this to a lot of other industries. Think about construction and improving worker safety on site. Think about lone workers who have to go into some undesirable type areas. They can move it into other areas. Next thing that I'm excited about is LoRa, which is one of these low power WANs launching in India. And I'm excited about this because Tata is going to create an IoT dedicated network that will cover all the tier 1 to 4 cities by 2018, which is 400 million people. But that's not why I'm excited. Why I'm excited is because we're bringing together supply and demand. So if you look at the demand in industry, the top industries, and this is a country with 1.3 billion people, retail and wholesale, agri, real estate, banking, insurance, and IT. All of these have a big role for IoT. And this doesn't even include smart cities, where Modi has announced the 100 Smart City project. And it doesn't include manufacturing, which is massive as well. Then you bring the supply side. You've got your technology vendors. Plus, you've got 5 of the top 10 global systems integrators are from India, which means you've got people there who are already driving other projects, now have this great market to go to. And they've got a massive opportunity. But it's not that simple. That could create equilibrium, but there's one problem: low labor costs. How do we cost in a solution in India to make it work? Because labor is so cheap, the price points have to be that low. And this is the problem we face with smart cities across ASEAN and the developing world. And think about this. For smart cities, we start in Tokyo, we start in Sydney, we start in Singapore, and we start in Seoul. And we price the solutions so they're acceptable at that market. But then we go to Jakarta, then we go to Mumbai or Delhi, and we say, buy this solution, and it doesn't cost in anymore. We need things to be developed at a price point that can actually drive this. So that's why I think this is a game changer. These people, this ecosystem, will go after the local opportunity. They'll manufacture products there that are actually going to be for that local market. So instead of taking the developed market first approach, we're going to go developing market first approach because we'll price them for this market, and that will then kickstart smart cities and IoT across Asia, and particularly in developing countries. So track this one. It's not going to be easy. I don't guarantee it'll work. I like it because it creates a new opportunity to drive the market. Final one, the next big opportunity is PropTech. So I said before we're getting rid of a lot of our buzzwords. Here's a new one to add into the mix. Property tech is very exciting because the industry is just massive. You're looking at 217 trillion globally. It's the world's largest industry. But the industry as a whole basically is a little bit of a laggard when it comes to labor productivity. And according to a McKinsey report, labor productivity in construction is only growing at 1% a year for the last 2 decades. And when you look at the industry averages, it's closer to 3. So there's opportunity. What we also see is a massive rise in industry and VC funding going into PropTech. So what does that mean for Singapore? Depending on who you ask, there's between 279 and 450 fintech startups in Singapore. There's only 30 in PropTech. So we've got the money, we just need to start doing it. And to give you an idea about how much money is going in 2012 there was only $220 million going into PropTech VCs globally for a small amount of deals. Last year it nearly hit 2.7 billion, and it's already going to well exceed 3 billion this year. So it is exploding. It's a new market opportunity. And I like it because it's got a great roadmap. If you look at PropTech, it leverages some solutions like smart buildings, which we've had for a while. They can look at their supply chain and help with the logistics and streamlining it. Surveillance, for any building you have to watch out for the cameras. Predictive maintenance to make sure our equipment works more efficiently. Smartwatches, because on those construction sites, you don't want to have a worker get injured, so you can lose. Actually, Tata just launched a great watch for this for construction sites. Artificial intelligence, because then we don't need us to actually help it work better. We can have the machinery talk to each other. Augmented reality, this has been around for a long time in construction, where you can actually visualize what's under the ground, see where the piping is, and now we're moving into virtual reality. So if you look at companies like JLL, one of the world's largest commercial real estate firms, they've got a product called VR360, which allows people they're selling the products to or building a project can actually look at these projects in virtual reality. They don't have to go on site. They can get that real immersive feel. And finally, drones for remote site management. So it gets quite exciting when they do that. The drones will keep going and be exciting in the future. So what sets these apart? It's moving from proven tech to emerging tech, but most importantly, they're problem solvers. There's business and operational challenges, they're solving it. Next, the VC firms are looking for a fintech alternative. VC funding for fintech last year was down 60% in Singapore. Money's still there, it's got to go somewhere, so I like going into PropTech. And finally, industry-backed VC funds. All the major commercial real estate funds or firms are creating their own funds. So that's Capital Land has a $100 million plus fund started up. CBRE and JLL are doing it. Even Siam Development in Thailand has, I think, an $80 million fund going into PropTech. So everyone's getting involved in it now. Sets them apart, they're solutions. They're not just technology. All of these are looking at bringing together the ecosystem, and what they end up doing is they solve these problems, which is very important, because if you just have a solution that's technology for technology's sake, it doesn't work that well. Solve a problem with it. And finally, it's about this collaboration. They're finding new ways to bring everyone together. Most importantly, it's all about creativity. None of them are using something that's new and doesn't exist today. What they're doing is looking at something in a different way. And the best way to close it is this. Creativity is seeing what everyone else has seen and thinking what no one else has thought. The technologies exist, the ecosystem exists, the market demand exists. We need people to look at this creatively and come up with the solutions to fill the demand. And on that note, thank you very much for your time.